Lisa had always loved her quiet street. For 8 years, her little blue house had been her sanctuary. She'd painted the front door herself, planted roses by the mailbox, and even built a small wooden fence around her backyard. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. The house next door had been empty for almost a year. Lisa didn't mind the silence. She enjoyed her morning coffee on the porch without worrying about disturbing anyone. Her neighbors were friendly enough. The elderly couple across the street always waved, and the family with 3 kids down the block had become good friends over the years. Everything changed on a crisp Tuesday morning in October. Lisa was getting ready for work when she heard the rumble of a moving truck. She peeked through her bedroom window and saw boxes being carried into the house next door. Finally, a new neighbor. The woman directing the movers caught Lisa's attention immediately. She was probably in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair that didn't move despite the autumn breeze. She wore a cream-colored blazer and pointed at the movers with sharp, precise gestures. Even from a distance, Lisa could tell this woman was used to being in charge. Lisa decided to be neighborly. She baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies that evening and walked over to introduce herself. The woman answered the door with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, I'm Lisa from next door. Welcome to the neighborhood." Lisa held out the plate of cookies. "I thought you might be tired from moving." The woman looked at the cookies like they might be poisoned. "Barbara Richardson," she said curtly. "And thank you, but I don't eat sugar." Lisa tried to keep the conversation going. "Well, if you need anything, I'm right next door. This is a really friendly street. Everyone looks out for each other." Barbara's eyes swept over Lisa's house with obvious disapproval. Her gaze lingered on the small garden gnome by Lisa's front steps, the slightly faded welcome mat, and the wind chimes hanging from the porch ceiling. "I can see that," Barbara said in a tone that suggested she didn't think it was a good thing. "I'm sure we'll be talking soon." The door closed with a firm click, leaving Lisa standing on the porch with her rejected cookies. She walked home feeling puzzled. Maybe Barbara was just tired from the move. People could be grumpy when they were stressed. But over the next few days, Lisa began to notice things. Barbara seemed to spend a lot of time standing in her front yard, staring at Lisa's house. When Lisa left for work in the morning, she could feel eyes watching her from the window next door. When she came home in the evening, Barbara would suddenly appear outside, watering plants that clearly didn't need watering. The first real confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. Lisa was in her garden pulling weeds and enjoying the sunshine when she heard footsteps on her front walkway. She looked up to see Barbara approaching with a clipboard and a stern expression. "We need to talk," Barbara announced without any greeting. Lisa stood up, brushing dirt off her gardening gloves. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Barbara consulted her clipboard like she was reading from a legal document. "I've been appointed as the new HOA compliance officer for this neighborhood, and I need to discuss several violations on your property." Lisa blinked in confusion. "HOA? I'm sorry, but there's no homeowners association here. When I bought my house 8 years ago, my real estate agent specifically told me this wasn't an HOA neighborhood. That was actually one of the reasons I chose this street." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "Well, things change. The neighborhood has been incorporated into the Maple Grove Community Association, and there are standards that need to be maintained." She began reading from her clipboard in a voice that reminded Lisa of a school principal disciplining a student. "First, your fence. The current brown color is not on the approved color palette. It needs to be repainted in either sage green or antique white within 30 days. Lisa looked at her fence in bewilderment. She'd spent 2 weekends painting it just last spring. "But it's a perfectly normal brown fence. Half the houses on this street have brown fences. Second," Barbara continued, ignoring the interruption, "lawn ornaments are strictly prohibited. That includes your garden gnome, your wind chimes, and those colorful pinwheels by your flower bed." Lisa felt her temper rising. The garden gnome had been a housewarming gift from her sister. The wind chimes were a reminder of her grandmother, who had loved the gentle sound they made. Those aren't violations of anything. They're just personal touches that make a house feel like home. Barbara made a note on her clipboard. "Third, your vehicle." She pointed at Lisa's Honda Civic parked in the driveway. "Cars over 10 years old negatively impact property values and must be garaged or replaced." Now Lisa was getting angry. Her car was reliable, paid off, and perfectly functional. She'd never needed anything fancier, and she certainly couldn't afford a new car just because some self-appointed neighborhood watch decided her Honda wasn't good enough. "Look, "Barbara, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you can't just make up rules and demand people follow them. This isn't an HOA neighborhood, and even if it were, I never agreed to join any association." Barbara's smile was cold and calculating. "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse, Lisa. Everyone in this neighborhood is required to comply with community standards. You have 30 days to address these violations, or will be forced to take further action." "What kind of further action?" Lisa demanded. "That depends on how cooperative you decide to be," Barbara replied mysteriously. She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and one more thing. I'll be hosting a neighborhood meeting next Friday evening to discuss community improvements. I suggest you attend. It would be beneficial for you to understand how things work around here now." Lisa watched Barbara walk away, her mind racing. Something was very wrong with this whole situation. She'd lived here for 8 years without any problems. Her neighbors had never complained about her fence, her car, or her garden decorations. In fact, most of them had complimented her on how well she maintained her property. That evening, Lisa called her real estate agent, Jennifer, who had helped her buy the house. After digging through old files, Jennifer confirmed what Lisa already knew. "There's definitely no HOA," Jennifer said. "I remember specifically because you asked about it during the house hunting process. You wanted to avoid the restrictions and fees that come with homeowners associations. This neighborhood has always been just a regular residential street with no special associations or governing bodies." Lisa thanked Jennifer and hung up, feeling more confused than ever. If there was no HOA, what was Barbara up to? Why was she acting like she had authority over the neighborhood? And more importantly, what did she mean by further action if Lisa didn't comply with her demands? The next few days were uncomfortable. Every time Lisa stepped outside, she felt like she was being watched. Barbara had started taking pictures of Lisa's house from different angles, always with that clipboard in hand. She would stand at the property line between their yards, making notes and shaking her head disapprovingly. The breaking point came on Thursday evening. Lisa arrived home from work to find a bright yellow notice taped to her front door. It was printed on official-looking letterhead that read Maple Grove, Community Association, Violation Notice. The notice claimed that Lisa had failed to respond to previous warnings about property maintenance violations and that she was now in serious breach of community covenants. It demanded immediate compliance with all previously stated requirements and threatened escalated enforcement measures. If she didn't respond within 48 hours, Lisa stared at the paper in disbelief. The language was formal and intimidating, full of legal-sounding phrases that made it seem like she was in real trouble. For a moment, she almost doubted herself. Could there really be an HOA she didn't know about? Had she somehow missed important paperwork when she bought her house? But then she looked around at her quiet street, at the neighbors she'd known for years, at the home she'd lovingly maintained and improved. Nothing had changed except Barbara's arrival. The only person who seemed to have a problem with Lisa's property was the woman who'd moved in less than 2 weeks ago and immediately declared herself the neighborhood authority. Lisa folded the notice and walked inside, her mind made up. She wasn't going to be bullied by someone with a clipboard and a superiority complex. Tomorrow she would start making some phone calls of her own. If Barbara wanted to play games with fake authority, Lisa was ready to find out exactly what kind of game they were playing. Lisa spent her Friday morning doing something she'd never thought she'd need to do, investigating her own neighborhood. She pulled out every document from her home purchase, spreading them across her kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. The deed, the title insurance, the disclosure statements, the inspection reports, everything was there. And nowhere did she find any mention of a homeowners association. She called the county clerk's office and spoke to a helpful woman named Carol who confirmed that no HOA had ever been registered for Maple Creek Drive. Lisa then contacted her home insurance company, her mortgage lender, and even the city planning office. The answer was the same everywhere. There was no homeowners association, no community covenants, and no governing body with authority over private property on her street. Armed with this information, Lisa felt confident and vindicated. Barbara was running some kind of scam, though Lisa couldn't figure out what the endgame was. Maybe she was just a control freak who liked bossing people around. Either way, Lisa was ready to put an end to it. But Barbara wasn't done. In fact, she was just getting started. That afternoon, Lisa found another notice on her door. This one was even more official looking than the first, complete with a fake seal and references to municipal code violations. It claimed that Lisa's property had been inspected by authorized HOA representatives and found to be in violation of health and safety standards. The notice demanded that she appear at the mandatory neighborhood meeting that evening or face immediate enforcement action. Lisa laughed out loud when she read it. The whole thing was so ridiculous that she almost admired Barbara's creativity. Who spent this much time making fake documents just to harass a neighbor? But her amusement turned to concern when she realized how authentic the paperwork looked. Someone who didn't know better might actually be intimidated by these official-sounding threats. The neighborhood meeting was held in Barbara's living room, and Lisa decided to attend out of curiosity. She wanted to see exactly what Barbara was telling people and whether any of the neighbors were actually buying into this HOA nonsense. When Lisa arrived, she found about 8 people gathered in Barbara's spotless living room. She recognized most of them: the young couple from 3 houses down who'd moved in last year, the retired teacher from around the corner, and a few others she'd seen but never really talked to. What surprised her was how seriously they all seemed to be taking Barbara's presentation. Barbara had prepared a whole slideshow on her laptop, projected onto her white living room wall. She talked about property values and community standards like she was running for mayor. She showed before and after photos of other neighborhoods that had supposedly been improved through HOA management. She even had charts and graphs showing how home prices increased when communities implemented strict guidelines. Now, I know some of you might be wondering about the legal authority behind these changes, Barbara said, clicking to a new slide. I want to assure you that everything we're doing is completely legitimate. The Maple Grove Community Association was established last month through a special municipal ordinance, and all properties in this area are now subject to our community covenants. Lisa almost choked on her coffee. The lies were so bold and so detailed that she wondered if Barbara actually believed them herself. But when she looked around the room, she saw nodding heads and interested faces. People were buying this story. Barbara continued with her presentation, outlining a series of improvements she wanted to implement: new streetlights, uniform mailboxes, restrictions on lawn decorations, and mandatory landscaping guidelines. She even proposed a monthly fee of $50 per household to fund these enhancements. When question time came, Lisa raised her hand. I'd like to see the paperwork for this municipal ordinance you mentioned. As a homeowner, I have the right to review any legal documents that affect my property. Barbara's smile didn't waver, but Lisa caught a flash of irritation in her eyes. Of course, Lisa. I'll have copies available for everyone next week. Tonight is just an informational session to get everyone on board with the vision. After the meeting, Lisa lingered to talk with some of the neighbors. She was shocked to discover that several of them had already received their own violation notices. The Hendersons had been told their flower garden was too colorful for community standards. The Patels had been informed that their decorative mailbox needed to be replaced with a standard model. Even old Mr. Wu had been cited for having excessive bird feeders in his backyard. What bothered Lisa most was that some of her neighbors seemed genuinely worried about these fake violations. Mrs. Henderson confided that she was considering replanting her entire front garden because she didn't want to cause problems in the neighborhood. Mr. Patel said he was looking into replacing his hand-carved mailbox, a beautiful piece his son had made in woodworking class, because Barbara had told him it was non-compliant. Lisa tried to explain what she'd learned from her research, but the responses were mixed. Some neighbors seemed relieved to hear that there was no real HOA, but others appeared skeptical of Lisa's claims. Barbara had done her homework well, creating such official-looking documentation that people weren't sure what to believe. The situation escalated over the weekend. Lisa came home from grocery shopping on Saturday to find Barbara in her front yard with a measuring tape, taking detailed measurements of her fence height and recording the information on yet another clipboard. When Lisa asked what she was doing, Barbara claimed she was conducting a compliance audit and that Lisa's fence exceeded the maximum allowable height by 2 inches. On Sunday morning, Lisa discovered that someone had left a stack of flyers on every doorstep in the neighborhood. The flyers, printed on the same fake HOA letterhead, contained a list of problem properties that were negatively impacting community standards. Lisa's house was at the top of the list, with a detailed description of her supposed violations and a statement that she was refusing to cooperate with community improvement efforts. Lisa felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger as she read the flyer. Barbara had essentially painted her as the neighborhood troublemaker, the person standing in the way of everyone else's happiness and property values. The worst part was that some of the claims were twisted versions of the truth. Yes, Lisa had an older car, but it was well maintained and reliable. Yes, she had garden decorations, but they were tasteful and well cared for. Barbara had taken normal, everyday things and made them sound like serious problems. The final straw came on Monday evening. Lisa arrived home from work to find a bright orange notice posted on her front door, not taped this time, but nailed directly into the wood with 4 large nails that left obvious holes. The notice declared her home condemned by HOA authority and ordered her to vacate the premises within 72 hours due to multiple unresolved violations and failure to comply with community standards. Lisa stared at the notice in disbelief. The audacity was breathtaking. Barbara was actually trying to evict her from her own home using completely fabricated authority. The notice included references to municipal code, enforcement, county health department violations, and legal action if Lisa didn't comply. But what made Lisa's blood run cold was the realization that this wasn't just harassment anymore. Barbara was clearly escalating her tactics, and Lisa had no idea how far she was willing to go. The fake eviction notice looked convincing enough that it might fool a landlord, an employer, or even a police officer who didn't take the time to verify its authenticity. That evening, Lisa called her sister Rachel, who lived across town. Rachel was a paralegal and had always been good at cutting through complicated situations to find practical solutions. "This woman sounds completely unhinged," Rachel said after Lisa explained the situation. "You need to document everything. Every notice, every conversation, every interaction. Take photos, save all the paperwork, and start keeping a detailed log of what's happening and when." "But what's her endgame?" Lisa asked. "What does she get out of this? It can't just be about my garden gnome and my car." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but people who go to these lengths usually have a specific goal in mind. Maybe she wants to buy your house cheap, or maybe she's just someone who gets off on controlling other people. Either way, you need to be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better." Lisa spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to every sound outside. For the first time since moving into her house 8 years ago, she didn't feel safe in her own home. Barbara had managed to turn her peaceful street into a place of conflict and uncertainty, and Lisa had no idea what she might try next. The next morning brought a new surprise. Lisa checked her mailbox to find a letter from her insurance company, informing her that they had received a report of safety violations at her property and requesting immediate clarification. There was also a message on her voicemail from someone claiming to be a city code enforcement officer, asking her to call back regarding multiple complaints about her property. Lisa realized with growing horror that Barbara wasn't just harassing her directly anymore. She was systematically contacting every organization and company connected to Lisa's homeownership, spreading lies and trying to create real problems where none had existed before. As she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by fake notices and real phone messages, Lisa understood that she was dealing with someone far more dangerous than just an annoying neighbor. Barbara wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted, whatever that was, and Lisa was going to have to fight back before the situation spiraled completely out of control. Lisa had never felt more alone than she did that Tuesday morning, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. The fake eviction notice was still nailed to her front door, and she couldn't bring herself to remove it. Every time she looked at it, she felt a mix of anger and helplessness that made her stomach churn. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the gentle knock at her back door. When she opened it, she found Mrs. Chen from across the street standing on her back porch, with a concerned expression and a plate covered with aluminum foil. "Hi, honey," Mrs. Chen said softly. "I brought you some dumplings. I thought you might need some comfort food." Lisa felt tears prick her eyes. Mrs. Chen was in her 70s and had lived on the street longer than anyone else. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed when you hadn't brought in your mail for a few days and would check to make sure you were okay. "Thank you," Lisa managed. "That's really sweet of you." Mrs. Chen stepped inside and set the plate on the counter. Lisa, I need to tell you something. That woman next door came to my house yesterday. Lisa's heart sank. What did she want? She had this whole folder of papers and was telling me about some new neighborhood association. She said I owed $2,000 in back fees for community improvements. Mrs. Chen's eyes flashed with indignation. $2,000? Can you imagine? I've lived here for 23 years and never paid a penny to any association. Lisa felt a surge of hope. Finally, someone else was seeing through Barbara's lies. What did you tell her? Mrs. Chen chuckled. I told her she could take her fake papers and her fake fees and march herself right back where she came from. I may be old, but I'm not stupid. I know a scam when I see one. Over the next hour, Mrs. Chen revealed that she'd been doing some investigating of her own. After that woman left my house, I called my grandson Kevin. He's a lawyer in the city, and I had him look up this so-called Maple Grove Community Association. There's no record of it anywhere. No business license, no incorporation papers, nothing. She pulled out a small notebook from her purse. I also talked to some of the other neighbors. Real quietly, you understand. I didn't want that woman to know what I was doing. Lisa leaned forward eagerly. What did you find out? Well, it turns out she's been busy. The Patel family got one of those violation notices about their mailbox. The Hendersons were told their flower garden was against community rules. Even young Tommy Rodriguez got cited for parking his motorcycle in his own driveway. Mrs. Chen shook her head. But here's the thing, she hasn't bothered everyone. She seems to be picking and choosing her targets. Lisa thought about this. What do you mean? The families she's going after. They're either new to the neighborhood, elderly like me, or they're people who keep to themselves and might not know how to fight back. She hasn't said a word to the Johnsons next to me, and Bill Johnson is a retired police sergeant. She hasn't bothered the Williams family either, and Dr. Williams works for the county attorney's office. This revelation made Lisa feel both better and worse. Better because it meant Barbara was a calculating predator, rather than someone with legitimate authority. Worse because it showed just how deliberate and manipulative her behavior really was. Mrs. Chen patted Lisa's hand. Don't you worry, dear. We're not going to let this continue. Over the next few days, Lisa watched in amazement as Mrs. Chen orchestrated a quiet neighborhood rebellion. The elderly woman had a network of relationships built over 2 decades of living on the street, and she used every connection to spread the truth about Barbara's scam. Mrs. Chen started with the longtime residents, the people who remembered the neighborhood before Barbara arrived. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, who had raised 3 children in their house and knew every family that had ever lived on the street. The Rodriguez family, whose teenage son Tommy had been helping neighbors with yard work since he was 12. The Williams family, who hosted an annual block party every summer. Each conversation led to more conversations. The Johnsons called their old neighbors who had moved away but still kept in touch. Dr. Williams mentioned the situation to colleagues who lived in nearby neighborhoods and had dealt with similar scams. Tommy Rodriguez talked to his friends from high school who now worked in various city departments. What emerged was a clear picture of Barbara's tactics. She was targeting people she thought would be easy to intimidate or unlikely to verify her claims. The new residents who didn't know the neighborhood's history. The elderly who might be confused by official-looking paperwork. The working parents who were too busy to spend time researching HOA laws. But her strategy had a fatal flaw. She had underestimated the sense of community on Maple Creek Drive. The turning point came on Friday evening. Lisa was watering her front garden when she noticed unusual activity up and down the street. People were coming out of their houses, walking over to chat with neighbors gathering in small groups on sidewalks and driveways. At first she thought something had happened, maybe a power outage or a gas leak. Then Mrs. Henderson approached her with a warm smile. Lisa, I owe you an apology. That woman had me convinced that my flower garden was causing problems for everyone. I was actually planning to dig up all my tulip bulbs this weekend. Behind Mrs. Henderson came Mr. Patel, carrying his beautiful hand-carved mailbox. I was going to replace this tomorrow, he said, running his hand over the smooth wood. My son made this for me when he graduated high school. I can't believe I almost threw it away because of that woman's lies. One by one, neighbors approached Lisa to share their stories and offer their support. The young couple from down the street apologized for believing Barbara's presentations about property values. Old Mr. Wu brought over a plate of cookies and confided that he'd been worried about getting in trouble for feeding the birds in his backyard. As the sun began to set, Lisa found herself standing in the middle of what felt like an impromptu block party. People were laughing, sharing stories, and reconnecting with neighbors they hadn't talked to in months. Children were playing in the street while their parents caught up on neighborhood news. The mood shifted when Barbara emerged from her house, clearly agitated by all the activity. She marched across her front lawn with her ever-present clipboard, her face set in determined lines. "Excuse me," she called out loudly, her voice cutting through the friendly chatter. "This gathering is in violation of community noise ordinances. I'm going to have to ask everyone to disperse immediately." The conversations died away as everyone turned to look at her. For a moment, Lisa felt the old anxiety creep back. Even knowing that Barbara had no real authority, there was something intimidating about her official tone and confident demeanor. But then Bill Johnson stepped forward. Lisa had never talked to him much, but she knew he was a retired police sergeant who had worked in the city for 30 years. He was a big man with graying hair and kind eyes that could turn very serious when the situation called for it. "Ma'am," he said politely but firmly, "I don't know who you think you are, but you have no authority to order anyone to do anything on a public street." Barbara straightened her shoulders and lifted her clipboard like a shield. "I'm the HOA compliance officer for this community, and I have every right to enforce community standards." Bill Johnson's expression didn't change, but something in his voice got very cold. "There is no HOA in this neighborhood. There never has been. And if you continue to harass these people with fake legal notices and fraudulent claims of authority, you're going to find yourself in serious legal trouble." For the first time since Lisa had met her, Barbara seemed genuinely rattled. Her confident facade cracked just slightly, and Lisa caught a glimpse of uncertainty in her eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about," Barbara said, but her voice lacked its usual commanding tone. "Actually, I do," Bill replied. "I spent 3 decades investigating fraud and harassment cases. I know exactly what you're doing, and I know exactly what laws you're breaking. The question is whether you're smart enough to stop before this gets worse for you." Barbara looked around the circle of neighbors, perhaps expecting to see support or at least uncertainty. Instead, she found faces that ranged from disapproving to openly hostile. Mrs. Chen crossed her arms and glared at her. The Rodriguez family stood together, with Tommy's father's hand protectively on his son's shoulder. Even the newer residents who had initially seemed sympathetic to Barbara's HOA pitch were now looking at her with suspicion. "This isn't over," Barbara said finally, her voice shaking slightly. "You people have no idea what you're dealing with." She turned and stalked back toward her house, but not before Lisa caught the look of pure rage that flashed across her face. In that moment, Lisa realized that Mrs. Chen had been right to worry. Barbara wasn't just a scam artist or a control freak. There was something deeper and more dangerous driving her behavior, and being exposed wasn't going to make her back down. As the unofficial neighborhood meeting continued, Dr. Williams approached Lisa with a serious expression. "I think we need to be prepared for this to escalate," she said quietly. "People like this don't usually go away quietly when their schemes are exposed. They tend to double down and get more aggressive." Lisa nodded, feeling a chill despite the warm evening air. Looking around at her neighbors, people who had rallied to support her when she needed it most, she felt grateful but also afraid. Barbara had shown that she was willing to go to great lengths to maintain her fiction of authority. Now that the entire neighborhood was united against her, what would she try next? The answer to that question would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would be more shocking than any of them could have imagined. The weekend after the neighborhood confrontation passed quietly, and Lisa almost allowed herself to hope that Barbara had gotten the message. Maybe being called out so publicly had been enough to make her realize that her scheme wasn't working. Maybe she would just quietly pack up and move on to easier targets somewhere else. That hope was shattered on Monday morning when Lisa arrived at work to find her boss, Janet, waiting for her with a concerned expression. "Lisa, I need to talk to you in my office," Janet said without her usual morning pleasantries. Lisa followed her boss down the hallway, her mind racing through possible explanations. She was a good employee with an excellent track record. She'd never been in trouble at work before. What could possibly be wrong? Janet closed the office door and gestured for Lisa to sit down. "I received a very strange phone call on Friday afternoon. Someone claiming to be a neighbor of yours called to tell me that you were involved in some kind of neighborhood dispute, and that it was affecting your mental health." Lisa felt her stomach drop. What exactly did they say? The caller claimed that you were refusing to follow community rules, harassing other residents and showing signs of emotional instability. They suggested that the stress might be affecting your work performance and that I should be aware of the situation. Janet leaned forward, her expression softening. Now, I've worked with you for 4 years, and I know you well enough to recognize complete nonsense when I hear it. Your work has been excellent, and you've never shown any signs of emotional problems. But I wanted you to know that someone out there is trying to damage your reputation. Lisa closed her eyes and took a deep breath. It's my neighbor, Barbara. She's been harassing me for weeks, claiming that there's an HOA in our neighborhood and that my house violates community standards. None of it is true, but she's escalating her tactics. Janet nodded thoughtfully. I figured it was something like that. The caller refused to give their name, which was a red flag. But Lisa, you need to be careful. This person called your workplace, which means they're willing to try to damage your livelihood. That's a serious escalation. The conversation with Janet was just the beginning. Over the next few days, Lisa discovered that Barbara had launched a systematic campaign to disrupt every aspect of her life. Her mortgage company called to ask about reports of property violations that might affect her loan status. Her car insurance company wanted to discuss neighborhood complaints about her vehicle. Even her dentist's office called to say they'd received a complaint about her behavior during her last appointment. Each call required Lisa to explain the situation, provide documentation, and reassure companies and service providers that she was not the problem neighbor she was being portrayed as. It was exhausting and humiliating, and she realized that Barbara was betting on her giving up rather than fighting back against such a comprehensive campaign. But the most frightening escalation came when Barbara started involving city services. Lisa received a visit from a code enforcement officer who had received multiple complaints about structural issues with her house. The officer was professional and thorough, conducting a complete inspection and finding absolutely nothing wrong with the property. Ma'am, I have to tell you, this is one of the cleanest inspections I've done all year, the officer said as he completed his paperwork. Whoever called in these complaints either has serious misconceptions about housing code requirements, or they're deliberately filing false reports. Lisa wasn't surprised when a building inspector showed up 2 days later, responding to complaints about unpermitted additions to her home. Like the code enforcement officer, he found nothing to cite and seemed puzzled by the nature of the complaints. The caller claimed you had built an illegal deck and added rooms without permits, he explained. But your house matches the original building plans perfectly. There's nothing here that would require a permit or inspection. The pattern became clear to Lisa. Barbara was filing false complaints with every city department she could think of, hoping that something would stick or that the harassment would become too much for Lisa to handle. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Lisa had just finished dinner when she heard pounding on her front door. Through the peephole, she saw 2 police officers standing on her porch, their expressions serious. When she opened the door, the older officer spoke first. Ma'am, we received a complaint that you threatened your neighbor with violence. We need to talk to you about an incident that allegedly occurred this afternoon. Lisa felt the world tilt around her. I've been at work all day. I just got home 20 minutes ago. What incident? The younger officer consulted his notebook. Your neighbor claims that you approached her while she was getting her mail and threatened to hurt her if she didn't stop filing complaints about your property. She says you were agitated and aggressive and she's concerned for her safety. Lisa stared at them in disbelief. That's completely false. I haven't spoken to Barbara, that's my neighbor, in over a week. I've been avoiding her completely because she's been harassing me with fake HOA violations. The officers exchanged glances. Lisa could tell they were trying to assess the situation, looking for signs that might indicate who was telling the truth. Ma'am, can you account for your whereabouts this afternoon between 2 and 3 o'clock? The older officer asked. I was at work. I can give you my supervisor's number, and my co-workers can verify that I was in meetings all afternoon. I have my keycard swipe records if you need them. As Lisa provided her employment information, she noticed movement in the front window of the house next door. Barbara was watching the scene unfold, and even from a distance, Lisa could see the satisfied expression on her face. The younger officer followed Lisa's gaze and frowned. Is that your neighbor? Yes, that's Barbara Richardson. She's the one who's been filing false complaints about my property for weeks. The older officer asked Lisa to wait while they spoke with Barbara. Lisa watched from her doorway as they knocked on Barbara's door and had a lengthy conversation. She couldn't hear what was being said, but she could see Barbara gesturing animatedly and pointing toward Lisa's house. When the officers returned, their demeanor had shifted slightly. "Ma'am, we're not going to file a report at this time," the older officer said. "Your neighbor's story has some inconsistencies, and your alibi for this afternoon checks out. But we want to document this incident in case there are future problems." After the police left, Lisa called Mrs. Chen. The elderly woman arrived within minutes, bringing her grandson Kevin with her. Kevin was the lawyer Mrs. Chen had mentioned earlier, and Lisa was relieved to have someone with legal expertise to help her understand her options. "This has gone way beyond neighborly disputes," Kevin said after hearing about the false police report. "Filing false complaints with city departments is a crime. Making false reports to police is a felony. This woman is systematically harassing you using government agencies as weapons." Mrs. Chen was furious. "In all my years living here, I've never seen anything like this. That woman is dangerous." Kevin pulled out his laptop and began taking detailed notes. "We need to document everything. Every fake notice, every false complaint, every interaction. I'm going to help you file counter complaints and look into getting a restraining order." But as they were talking, Lisa's phone rang. It was Mrs. Henderson from down the street, and she sounded panicked. "Lisa, something terrible has happened. Barbara came to our house an hour ago with some kind of official-looking paperwork, claiming that our property taxes were in arrears because we hadn't paid HOA fees. She said the county was going to put a lien on our house if we didn't pay her $1,500 immediately." Lisa felt sick. "Please tell me you didn't give her any money." My husband was about to write her a check when I remembered what Mrs. Chen told us about her being a fraud. But Lisa, she had such official paperwork. It looked completely legitimate. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed every word. After Mrs. Henderson hung up, Kevin looked grim. "She's escalating to financial fraud now, trying to collect fake fees from elderly residents who might be more vulnerable to official-looking documents." This is getting very serious. That night, Lisa lay awake staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound outside. Barbara had shown that she was willing to involve police, city departments, and now attempt outright financial fraud to achieve whatever her goal was. Lisa still didn't understand what Barbara ultimately wanted, but it was clear that she wasn't going to stop until someone made her stop. The next morning brought a new horror. Lisa walked outside to get her newspaper and found her car covered in what looked like official stickers and notices. Bright yellow papers were plastered across her windshield, side windows, and even the roof of her Honda. As she got closer, she realized they were fake parking tickets and towing notices, all bearing the letterhead of the fictional Maple Grove Community Association. The papers claimed her car was illegally parked in her own driveway and threatened immediate towing if it wasn't moved to an approved location. But the most disturbing part was a large orange sticker on her driver's side window that read, "Vehicle condemned, do not operate." It looked official enough that someone driving by might actually believe her car had been deemed unsafe by the authorities. As Lisa stood there looking at her vandalized car, she realized that Barbara had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy Lisa's life piece by piece, until she either gave up and moved away or lost everything she'd worked to build. What Lisa didn't know was that Barbara had made a critical mistake with her latest escalation. The fake parking tickets and vehicle condemnation notice were about to attract the attention of someone who had both the authority and the knowledge to put an end to Barbara's reign of terror, once and for all. Lisa was carefully peeling the fake notices off her car when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Officer Patricia Williams walking across her driveway, still in uniform from the night shift. Patricia lived 4 houses down and had been one of the neighbors Lisa had connected with during the impromptu block party. "I saw all this from my window when I got home," Patricia said, gesturing at the papers scattered around Lisa's car. "This is getting out of hand." Lisa held up one of the fake parking tickets. "She covered my car with these overnight. They look so real that I'm worried someone might actually think my car has been condemned." Patricia examined the ticket carefully, her expression growing more serious as she read. "Lisa, this isn't just harassment anymore. Impersonating government authority is a serious crime. These fake tickets and notices could be mistaken for real citations, which means she's essentially counterfeiting official documents. She pulled out her phone and took pictures of all the papers, then looked at Lisa with a determined expression. "I'm done watching this happen. I'm calling this in to the detective division." Within an hour, Detective Mark Thompson arrived at Lisa's house. He was a tall, methodical man who had been investigating fraud cases for 15 years. Patricia had filled him in on the basic situation, but he wanted to hear the whole story from Lisa herself. As Lisa recounted everything that had happened over the past month, Detective Thompson took detailed notes and asked specific questions about dates, times, and the exact nature of Barbara's claims. He was particularly interested in the fake eviction notice and the attempts to collect money from other neighbors. "What bothers me most about this case," Detective Thompson said, "is how sophisticated these fake documents are. Most neighborhood harassers just yell and complain. This level of document forgery and systematic harassment suggests someone with experience." He asked Lisa to gather every piece of paper Barbara had given her, every fake notice and violation claim. As they spread the documents across Lisa's dining room table, Detective Thompson's expression grew increasingly concerned. "These aren't amateur forgeries," he said, examining the fake letterhead and official-looking seals. "Whoever made these has done this before. The formatting, the legal language, even the paper quality. This is professional-level deception." Detective Thompson made several phone calls while Lisa organized the paperwork. When he finished, his expression was grim. "I ran Barbara Richardson's name through our database and we have a problem. There's no record of a Barbara Richardson purchasing the house next door. In fact, according to the county records, that house is still owned by First National Bank as a foreclosed property." Lisa felt her blood run cold. "What does that mean?" "It means your neighbor might not be who she claims to be, and she might not have any legal right to be living in that house at all." The investigation that followed moved quickly. Detective Thompson contacted the bank that owned the foreclosed property and discovered that they had been trying to locate an unauthorized occupant for 3 months. Someone had been living in the house, using fake identification to set up utilities and convince neighbors they were the legitimate owner. But the real breakthrough came when Detective Thompson ran the fingerprints from one of the fake notices through the national database. The results revealed a shocking truth that explained everything about Barbara's behavior. The woman calling herself Barbara Richardson was actually Helen Morrison, and she had a criminal history spanning 4 states and 12 years. Her pattern was always the same. She would move into foreclosed or temporarily vacant properties, establish herself as a fake HOA president or compliance officer, and systematically harass neighbors until they either moved away or paid her fictitious fees. In Arizona, she had convinced an entire neighborhood to pay monthly HOA dues for 2 years before being caught. In Colorado, she had successfully forced 3 families to sell their homes by filing false code violations and creating fake legal pressure. In Texas, she had collected over $40,000 in fake fines and fees before disappearing when authorities closed in. "She's what we call a neighborhood predator," Detective Thompson explained to Lisa and the assembled neighbors who had gathered in Mrs. Chen's living room to hear the results of the investigation. "She targets communities where she thinks she can establish false authority and either collect money or force property transfers through harassment." Mrs. Chen raised her hand like she was in school. But what was her endgame here? She wasn't asking for money from Lisa, just trying to make her leave. Detective Thompson consulted his notes. "Based on her previous cases, we think she was planning to buy Lisa's house at a below-market price once the harassment became unbearable. She's done this before. Create enough problems that people become desperate to sell quickly and cheaply just to escape the situation." The pieces fell into place for Lisa. Barbara's focus on her property values, her claims about Lisa's house bringing down the neighborhood, her systematic attempts to make Lisa's life impossible. It was all designed to pressure her into selling her home for whatever she could get. "The really sick part," Detective Thompson continued, "is that she was probably planning to flip Lisa's house for a profit while moving on to terrorize another neighborhood somewhere else." The arrest happened that same afternoon. When police arrived at the foreclosed house with a warrant, they found Helen Morrison packing boxes in preparation for another quick disappearance. She had clearly realized that the investigation was closing in on her. The evidence they discovered in her house was overwhelming. Helen had maintained detailed files on every neighbor, including financial information she had somehow obtained, property records, and what appeared to be psychological profiles designed to identify the most vulnerable targets. She had fake letterhead for dozens of different fictional HOAs and municipal departments. Her computer contained templates for creating official-looking notices, violation citations, and even fake legal documents. Most disturbing of all, they found a folder labeled Maple Creek Success Plan that outlined her entire strategy for the neighborhood. Lisa's house was marked as primary target, quick sale potential. Other neighbors were categorized as fee collection, targets or intimidation subjects. The level of calculation and planning was chilling. Helen was charged with multiple felonies including fraud, identity theft, filing false police reports, impersonating government officials, and criminal harassment. The district attorney was particularly interested in her case because of the multi-state pattern of similar crimes. During the court proceedings, even more shocking details emerged. Helen had been evicted from her last legitimate residence over a year ago and had been squatting in foreclosed properties ever since, using them as bases for her neighborhood harassment schemes. She had fake identification documents for at least 6 different names and had been running similar scams simultaneously in 3 different cities. The prosecutor revealed that Helen's previous victims included elderly residents who had paid thousands of dollars in fake fees, families who had sold their homes at significant losses to escape her harassment, and at least 2 people who had suffered serious mental health consequences from her psychological manipulation. In her victim impact statement, Lisa described the month of terror Helen had put her through and the way it had affected not just her but her entire neighborhood. "She didn't just try to steal my house," Lisa said. "She tried to steal my sense of safety, my relationships with my neighbors, and my faith in the community I had built over 8 years. Helen was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her identified victims across multiple states. She was also banned from entering the county for 5 years after her release and required to register her address with law enforcement as a condition of her parole." The day after the sentencing, Lisa's neighbors organized a real block party to celebrate. Mrs. Chen made her famous dumplings, the Rodriguez family provided music, and even the newer residents who had initially been fooled by Helen's presentations brought dishes to share. As Lisa stood in her front yard, surrounded by neighbors who had become real friends through their shared ordeal, she looked at her little blue house with fresh appreciation. The garden gnome was still by her front steps. Her colorful flowers were blooming beautifully, and her reliable Honda was parked safely in the driveway. Dr. Williams approached her with a smile. "You know, I think Helen actually did us a favor in a weird way. She brought this whole neighborhood together. We know each other better now than we have in years." Mrs. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "And we learned something important. We're stronger together than any one person trying to tear us apart." The foreclosed house next door was eventually sold to a young family with twin toddlers. Lisa often babysits for them on weekends, and their children love playing with the garden gnome that Helen had tried so hard to eliminate. Sometimes Lisa thinks about Helen's elaborate scheme and feels amazed that someone would go to such lengths to steal from and terrorize innocent people. But mostly, she feels grateful for the community that rallied around her when she needed it most. The fake HOA notices are long gone, but Lisa kept one as a reminder. It sits in a frame on her kitchen counter with a note from Mrs. Chen that reads, "Never let anyone make you believe you don't belong in your own home." The house on Maple Creek Drive is still painted blue, the fence is still brown, and the wind chimes still sing softly in the evening breeze, and Lisa wouldn't change any of it for the world.